I want to start today by asking you a question. And it's a question that completely flies in the face of, just about every piece of conventional wisdom out there.
Okay, I'm ready.
It goes against every corporate strategy textbook, every self-styled LinkedIn influencer you've ever encountered. Basically, why does every business guru out there tell you that the key to success is to, crush the competition?
Right, the whole kill or be killed mindset.
Exactly. What if the ultimate secret to unprecedented, world-changing success isn't about beating the competition at all? What if the secret is having absolutely no competition whatsoever?
It is a deeply radical premise. We are so heavily conditioned to view the commercial world as this battlefield.
Yeah, totally.
We naturally think in terms of market share, right? Of stealing customers, of fighting for a slice of an existing pie. But the framework we are unpacking today proposes that fighting over a slice of the pie is actually a guaranteed way to starve.
Which is just a crazy way to think about it.
Right. The goal isn't to win the war. The goal is to build an entirely new world where the war doesn't even exist.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to fundamentally rewire how you think about business, about innovation, and honestly, about how we build the future.
Yeah, it's a big one today.
We are diving into the core philosophies of a book called 0 to 1. This was born from Peter Thiel's highly coveted lectures at Stanford University and later distilled into the book with his co-author, Blake Masters.
And I think it is crucial to ground ourselves in exactly whose intellectual framework we are analyzing here, because Peter Thiel isn't, he's not an academic theorizing about business from some ivory tower.
No, not at all.
We are looking directly into the mind of a founder and investor who has repeatedly manufactured lightning in a bottle. I mean, he is the founder of PayPal. He founded Palantir.
2 massive companies.
Massive. And beyond that, he was the first outside investor in Facebook. He was the financial engine and strategic partner behind titans like Elon Musk with SpaceX and Tesla and Reid Hoffman with LinkedIn.
It's basically the resume of modern tech.
Exactly. So when he proposes a framework that contradicts standard business school dogma, we are looking at the operating system of someone who has demonstrably and repeatedly shaped the modern world.
Okay, so let's anchor this with a metaphor because I think it helps clarify the scale of what we're actually talking about here. I want you to think about baking.
Okay, baking. I like it.
Let's say you want to start a bakery. The conventional, safe way to do this is to take an existing chocolate chip cookie recipe and maybe, swap out the butter for brown butter or add a heavy pinch of sea salt.
Make it slightly more artisan.
Right. You look at what already exists and you iterate on it, and that is safe. But the philosophy we are exploring today isn't about tweaking a cookie recipe. We are talking about the person who looked at a world that only consumed savory meats and breads and invented the very concept of dessert.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
Cool.
One is a marginal update. The other permanently alters human behavior.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the foundational distinction in this book between going from 1 to n versus going from 0 to 1.
Let's break those vectors down because they represent 2 completely different ways of viewing human progress.
So going from 1 to n means adding more of something familiar. It is doing what we already know how to do. If you have a functional typewriter, right, and you build a factory to produce 100 more typewriters, you have made horizontal progress.
You're just copying things.
Exactly. You're scaling the status quo. Macroeconomically, this is globalization. It's taking a model that works in one place, like a specific supply chain or a franchise model, and just copying it everywhere.
Right. And then going from 0 to 1 is vertical progress. It means creating something entirely new, something strange, something unprecedented.
Yes.
Like if you have a typewriter and you invent the word processor, you haven't just made a better typewriter, you have gone from 0 to 1.
Because the act of creation is singular. It happens exactly once. And Thiel argues that the true definition of innovation is inextricably linked only to this 0 to 1 vertical leap. Technology, not globalization, is the true engine of 0 to 1 progress.
Here is where I want to push back a little on this terminology, though, because innovation is arguably the most abused word in the English language right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's totally lost its meaning.
It really has. It is a buzzword that Fortune 500 companies slap on the frosted glass in their lobbies to describe, like a slightly faster microchip or a new flavor of sparkling water.
Right. Look at our innovative new packaging.
Yes. So if true 0 to 1 innovation is this singular, almost mystical act of creation. How do we actually force our brains to create something from absolute nothing? I mean, it can't just be waiting for a eureka moment in the shower, right? How do you systematize a 0 to 1 leap?
Well, you systematize it by actively, aggressively questioning the past and challenging the consensus. You don't get from 0 to 1 by asking a focus group what they want. You cultivate a deeply contrarian mindset.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Thiel proposes a foundational question, an intellectual wedge, basically, to force this kind of thinking. And it's this. What valuable company is nobody building yet? Or, applied more philosophically, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
Let's sit with that second question for a second, because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
What important truth do very few people agree with you on? Sounds like a fun thought experiment.
Yeah.
But if you actually try to answer it honestly, it is agonizingly difficult.
It is incredibly hard to answer genuinely.
Because most people, if you corner them at a dinner party and ask that, they'll offer something like, well, I think our political system is completely captured by corporate interests.
Right. Which isn't contrarian in the slightest. Millions of people agree with that statement.
Exactly. It's a socially acceptable complaint masquerading as a radical thought. To actually find a truth that the vast majority of intelligent people fundamentally disagree with you on, it means you have to be willing to look deeply foolish.
You have to be willing to stand entirely alone, isolated from the herd.
Which is terrifying for most people.
It is. And to understand why that herd mentality is so universally powerful in modern business, we actually have to look backward. Thiel argues that our collective inability to think differently is a direct psychological hangover from the dot-com crash.
Okay, this is super interesting. The dot-com bubble as trauma.
Yes. The macroeconomic environment of the late 1990s is vital to understand here because trauma distorts human thinking on a mass scale. The late 90s internet craze was a period of absolute financial and psychological euphoria.
It was the Wild West.
It really was. Companies were going public with zero revenue, zero viable product, literally just adding .com to their name and watching their valuations explode. We were measuring success by, eyeballs and clicks instead of actual unit economics.
Which seems insane now.
Totally insane. So when the bubble spectacularly popped in March of 2000, wiping out trillions of dollars of wealth, it didn't just decimate portfolios, it wiped out an entire psychological framework for ambition.
It scared everyone straight.
Exactly. Silicon Valley and the global business community at large internalized 4 very specific yet entirely false lessons from that trauma.
They learned the wrong lessons from the pain.
Yeah.
Let's dig into these 4 reactionary dogmas, because I guarantee you, if you're listening to this, you will recognize these as the modern gospel of business and startup culture.
Absolutely.
So false lesson number 1, make incremental advances. The idea here was that anyone who claimed they were going to fundamentally, change the world was suffering from the exact fatal hubris that caused the crash. Small, safe, measurable steps only.
Right. And then false lesson number 2, stay lean and flexible. This is the bedrock of the entire lean startup methodology that dominates today.
It's everywhere.
The internalized lesson from 2000 was that having a rigid, long-term master plan is arrogant and fundamentally impossible. Instead, you should just build a minimum viable product, throw it into the market, obsess over customer feedback, and iterate endlessly. You don't have a vision, you just have an endless series of pivots.
False lesson number 3, improve on the competition. Don't try to invent a whole new market prematurely. Look at what is already succeeding, analyze their weaknesses, and make your version like 5% better.
And finally, false lesson number 4, focus on the product, not on sales.
Oh, this is a big one for engineers.
Huge. The dot-com era was famous for companies like Pets.com spending tens of millions of dollars on Super Bowl commercials with sock puppets while possessing a completely unworkable logistics model.
I remember that sock puppet.
Right. Everyone does. The resulting backlash created this purist belief that if your product requires advertising or dedicated salespeople, it must be inherently flawed. The technology should theoretically sell itself.
Okay, I have to jump in here and heavily challenge Thiel's rebuttal, especially regarding that second point, staying lean and flexible.
Let's hear it.
You're telling me that Eric Ries's lean startup methodology, agile development, constant iteration, which are basically the absolute holy grails of modern product development, are wrong. Thiel actually argues that a bad plan is better than no plan.
He does.
But wait, building a rigid master plan in a vacuum without customer iteration is exactly what led to monumental billion-dollar failures, like the Segway. or more recently, Quibi.
Right.
They had massive, inflexible plans, they ignored the market, and they burned billions. Isn't a rigid plan just a recipe for a founder's delusion?
That is the exact counter-argument most people raise, and it's a valid friction point. But Thiel's argument isn't that you should ignore reality or blindly march off a cliff.
Correct.
His argument is that endless iteration without a true north vision is just wandering in the wilderness. If you are exclusively reacting to immediate customer feedback, you might successfully optimize a product that people kind of like today, but you will never, ever build the unasked-for revolutionary product of tomorrow.
Because the customer doesn't know what tomorrow's product is yet.
Exactly. You become a slave to incrementalism. Think about it. Customers in 1999 did not know they needed to send money instantly via email. If Thiel and his team had just surveyed bank customers and iterated on their feedback, they would have built a slightly better paper checkbook.
Which wouldn't have been PayPal.
They wouldn't have built PayPal at all. You need a definitive vision to forcefully carve a new path, even if the tactical execution of that plan adapts along the way. A bad plan gives you a vector. No plan leaves you adrift in the prevailing currents.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
It's the difference between navigating by the stars versus just letting the waves push your boat around. So rejecting the trauma-induced lessons means embracing their exact opposites. Instead of incremental advances, the rule is boldness is better than triviality.
Yes. If you aren't trying to do something massively ambitious, you are essentially guaranteeing you will blend into the deafening noise of the one-to-N world.
Precisely. And instead of focusing purely on the product and viewing sales as a dirty word, the contrarian truth is that sales and distribution matter just as much as the product.
Which is a very bitter pill for many brilliant technologists to swallow.
Oh, for sure. They want to believe that pristine, elegant code is a magnet for humanity.
But if you have invented a true 0-to-1 technology, by definition, the world does not understand it yet. You have to educate the market. You have to overcome human inertia. Distribution is the necessary bridge between a brilliant creation and actual human adoption.
Which brings us to the rebuttal for the third false lesson: improve on the competition. The contrarian rule here is arguably the most explosive and counterintuitive idea we're going to discuss today.
It really is.
The rule is competitive markets destroy profits.
And if competitive markets destroy profits, we are led to the absolute core of Thiel's philosophy: the myth of competition versus the undeniable power of monopoly.
Let's really pull this apart, because in the West, we practically worship competition. We are indoctrinated to believe that competition is the ultimate engine of capitalism. It lowers prices for the consumer. It forces companies to improve quality. It's the ultimate Darwinian meritocracy.
That's the standard narrative, yeah.
So how can competition possibly be a bad thing for a business?
Well, we absolutely mythologize it. We credit competition with saving us from socialist breadlines. But here is the massive paradigm shift Thiel introduces. Capitalism and competition are actually opposites.
That is a total brain breaker. Capitalism and competition are opposites.
Yeah.
Walk us through the economic mechanics of that, because it sounds crazy at first.
It comes down to the strict economic definitions of the terms. Capitalism is premised on the accumulation of capital gathering, retaining, and deploying wealth and profits. But under the model of perfect competition, what happens to profits?
They disappear.
Exactly. Let's use the U.S. airline industry versus Google as a classic illustration. The airline industry is highly competitive. Every airline offers roughly the same product: a seat on a metal tube going from New York to L.A.
Right, an undifferentiated commodity.
Because the product is undifferentiated, they are forced to compete almost entirely on price. They undercut each other, their margins shrink to razor-thin fractions, and despite generating hundreds of billions in revenue, they historically keep only pennies of profit per passenger.
So they are generating massive cash flow, but they are barely surviving. A slight bump in oil prices or a minor recession bankrupts them.
Exactly. Under perfect competition, all profits get competed away. The value is captured by the consumer in the form of cheap tickets, but the businesses themselves are essentially bleeding out in a gladiator arena.
Wow. Okay, now contrast that with Google.
Google essentially has no real competition in core search. They don't have to price cut. They don't have to fight a daily war for basic survival. Because they are a monopoly, they capture and retain massive, unprecedented profits.
So the ideology of competition basically traps us. We build these undifferentiated commodity businesses.
Mm.
Another boutique coffee shop, another generic sauce tool, another digital marketing
Like a
agency.
million marketing agencies.
And we think we are practicing capitalism, but we are actually just entering a war of attrition. Think about swimming. If you were swimming in a competitive race, staring at the person in the lane next to you might make you paddle a fraction of a second faster.
Yes.
But it works in a narrowly defined, highly structured sport where the rules are fixed and the finish line is clearly marked. But business isn't a swimming pool. The environment is constantly changing. Staring at your competitor means you aren't looking at the horizon.
You aren't looking at the changing currents or the approaching storm.
Exactly. Staring at your competitor makes you obsessed with beating them by 1%, instead of asking, should we even be in the water? Could we build a boat?
Could we build a boat? Is the perfect distillation of 0 to 1 thinking. Creating trumps competing. The ultimate reward for creating something entirely new, the holy grail of this entire framework, is building a monopoly.
Now, we need to address the elephant in the room when we use the M word. Because immediately, people think of the Gilded Age. We think of mustache-twirling cartoon villains, Standard Oil, illegal price fixing, hoarding resources, and extorting the public. We think of antitrust laws.
And Thiel is very careful to differentiate here. We are not talking about a coercive monopoly that illegally corners a market or relies on government cronyism to block rivals. We are talking about a creative monopoly.
I created a monopoly.
A company that is so exceptionally good at what it does that no other firm can offer a viable substitute. Google has majority control over the search market, not because they are illegally blocking AltaVista from existing, but because their product is simply unmatched.
Right. A creative monopoly introduces a completely new product that benefits society at large, while simultaneously securing sustainable, massive profits for the creator. Competition means a struggle for survival, where long-term planning is a luxury you can't afford. Monopoly means you have the breathing room, the massive margins, to actually care about your employees, to fund wildly ambitious, decades-long research and development.
So if a creative monopoly is the destination, how do we identify the vehicle? What does a monopoly actually look like beneath the surface?
Good question.
Thiel provides a framework, and he explicitly warns that this is a framework for thinking, not a simple checklist, but it's 4 common characteristics found in successful monopolies.
Let's weave these together because they really feed into one another. The bedrock, the first characteristic, is proprietary technology. This is your moat. This is what makes you incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to copy.
Yes.
And the rule of thumb here is severe. It can't just be better. It must be a 10x improvement over the closest substitute.
The 10x metric is crucial because it addresses the reality of human behavior. Humans have incredible inertia. We are creatures of habit. Switching from a product we know and understand to a new product requires cognitive effort.
It's annoying to switch.
It is. If your new project management software is only 20% faster than what my team is currently using, I won't switch. The friction of retraining my staff completely negates the 20% benefit, but a 10x improvement. That magnitude of superiority is impossible to ignore. It forces adoption.
PayPal is a perfect example of this. I mean, before PayPal, if you bought a vintage jacket on eBay, you had to physically write a paper check.
I remember those days.
You had to put a stamp on it, mail it, and wait up to 2 weeks for the seller to receive it, cash it, and wait for it to clear before they shipped the item. The latency was absurd.
It was so painful.
So painful. But PayPal allowed you to send money instantly via email. It wasn't a marginal improvement on a checkbook. It was fundamentally a 10x improvement in the velocity of commerce.
Absolutely.
Or look at the iPad. Before Apple introduced it, tablets were just incredibly clunky, heavy laptops with terrible styluses running desktop operating systems that weren't designed for touch at all. Apple didn't tweak the stylus. They created a totally new interface paradigm. 10x improvement.
But having a 10x proprietary technology is only the spark. How does that spark become a wildfire? That leads to the second characteristic, network effects. This occurs when a product becomes inherently more valuable as more people use it.
Right, if I'm the only person on Earth with a telephone, the telephone is just a useless brick on my desk. I can't call anyone.
Nope.
If you get one, it's slightly useful. If 1 billion people have one, it's an indispensable utility. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, these are entirely driven by network effects.
But here's the paradox of network effects and where most startups fail. To build a massive global network, you must start with an incredibly small, microscopic market.
Which sounds backward.
It does. You cannot launch a network effect business to everyone because the network has no initial value. Mark Zuckerberg didn't start Facebook by trying to connect the whole world. He started by connecting a few thousand specific students at a single university, Harvard.
Right.
You must completely monopolize a micronetwork, establish absolute density before you can successfully expand to adjacent networks.
And as that network expands, it hits the third characteristic, economies of scale. A monopoly business must be scalable by design.
Exactly. This means the marginal cost of producing another unit of your product should be incredibly close to zero. Software is the ultimate expression of this. If you build a platform like Twitter, the cost of adding your 1 millionth user is essentially the same as adding your first user. It's just server space and bandwidth.
Compare that to a traditional service business. Say you open a highly successful yoga studio.
Okay.
It can be a great, profitable lifestyle business. But a yoga studio is inherently complicated to scale. If you want twice as many customers, you need to lease a second building, you need to hire and train more instructors, buy more physical mats, double your insurance premium.
Right, your costs scale almost linearly with your revenue.
Exactly. It lacks the explosive leverage required for a monopoly.
And finally, the fourth characteristic is branding. Companies like Apple have built impenetrable monopolies partly on the strength of a brand that signifies premium quality and design. However, the warning here is critical. Branding and positioning are only valuable if they're built on top of the first three characteristics.
You cannot build a monopoly on brand alone. We've seen this movie 1,000 times.
Oh, so many times.
Startup launches with an incredible logo, a massive PR campaign, celebrity endorsements, and a beautiful UI, only to collapse 9 months later because the core product didn't actually solve a problem with 10x proprietary technology. Brand is the amplifier. It cannot be the source signal.
Well said. So we have the anatomy: proprietary tech, network effects, economies of scale, and branding. But having the blueprint is one thing. Executing the build requires a specific strategic sequence. Thiel advocates for a strategy that often confuses ambitious founders. Niche first, then expand.
Which perfectly aligns with the paradox of network effects we just talked about. You don't try to conquer the world on day one. You find a small, highly defined target market, you dominate it completely, and only then do you broaden your horizons.
Jeff Bezos is the masterclass on this.
He really is. He didn't launch Amazon as the everything store. That would have been logistical suicide in 1994. He started deliberately by dominating the online book market. Books were easy to ship, easy to catalog, and there was a defined audience.
Yep.
Once he had the warehouses, the customer trust, and a total monopoly in books, he expanded to CDs, then DVDs, then electronics, and eventually everything.
And this strategy of niching down and avoiding direct competition brings up a massive point of tension with modern business culture, because the ultimate buzzword in Silicon Valley right now is disruption.
Oh, everybody wants to be a disruptor.
Every pitch deck claims to be a disruptor. Uber disrupted taxis, Airbnb disrupted hotels, but Thiel explicitly advises founders to avoid being a disruptor.
That seems completely contradictory, though.
Yeah.
If you're building a 10x technology, aren't you naturally going to disrupt someone? Why is he explicitly telling founders to avoid the disruptor label?
Because the concept of disruption is fundamentally adversarial. It implies you are entering an existing market and purposefully picking a fight with the entrenched legacy players. And fights are incredibly expensive, distracting, and dangerous.
Ah, look at Napster. They are the ultimate cautionary tale here. They disrupted the music recording industry practically overnight. They fundamentally changed how human beings accessed and consumed music. They achieved massive, unprecedented scale in terms of user base.
But they went bankrupt shortly after because they picked a massive fight with giant record labels who possess decades of legal and financial ammunition. Napster spent all their energy, capital, and focus fighting lawsuits instead of building sustainable, defensible value.
So the lesson is, do not obsess over competing, and do not make your identity about disrupting. If your entire mission is based on destroying an old industry, you are still letting the old industry define your parameters.
Exactly. The 0-to-1 approach is to create something that contributes to the overall growth of a totally new market. Don't fight for a slice of the existing pie, bake an entirely new one.
There's the baking analogy again. It always comes back to dessert. Okay, so we understand the mechanics. Aim for monopolies, build 10x tech, start in a micro niche, and avoid destructive disruption. But executing that blueprint requires a very specific psychological orientation toward the future. Thiel defines this state of mind as being a definite optimist.
This is perhaps the most philosophical yet wildly practical aspect of the entire 0 to 1 framework. Our attitude toward the future directly dictates what we are capable of building in the present.
There is a pervasive myth in our culture that wildly successful people are essentially just lucky, that they were in the right place at the right time, caught a wave, and rode it. But Thiel points to a phenomenal moment from January 2013 to counter this.
Ah, the tweet.
Yes, Jack Dorsey, the founder of both Twitter and Square, tweeted a simple 4-word sentence to his millions of followers: "Success is never accidental."
That sentence is the definitive manifesto of the definite optimist.
Right, because if success were purely a lottery ticket, statistical probability says serial entrepreneurs simply shouldn't exist. You don't win the Powerball 4 times in a row. People like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, Peter Thiel, they've created multiple, entirely distinct, multi-billion-dollar companies across different industries.
Yeah.
Luck does not scale like that.
Therefore, success is engineered. Thiel breaks down our view of the future into a quadrant. You can be optimistic or pessimistic, and you can be definite or indefinite. The definite optimist believes 2 fundamental things. 1, the future will be vastly better than the present. That's the optimism. 2, the future will be better because they are going to meticulously design it and forcefully build it. That is the definite part.
They figure out what they want, they develop a rigorous long-term plan, and they execute against it with extreme conviction.
Contrast that with what Thiel calls the indefinite optimist, which he argues is the mindset of much of the modern Western world. An indefinite optimist believes the future will generally get better, but they have absolutely no idea how, and they don't believe they have the agency to control it.
We just expect progress to sort of happen automatically.
Right. We expect our diversified stock portfolios to go up. We expect Apple to release a slightly thinner phone next year, but we lack a grand unifying vision. We just endlessly iterate, try to keep all our options open, and hope for the best.
But keeping your options open is the ultimate enemy of going from 0 to 1. You cannot achieve a 10x breakthrough if you are constantly hedging your bets and refusing to commit to a singular, bold vision. You have to burn the boats. And when you commit to that definite vision, you align yourself with the underlying mathematics of success, exponential growth, and the power law.
Let's talk about the math, because this is where the theory becomes reality.
Yeah.
We've all heard the quote attributed to Albert Einstein, calling compound interest the 8th wonder of the world, or the most powerful force in the universe.
Whether he actually said it is debated by historians, but the underlying mathematical truth is absolute.
Thiel also references the Matthew effect, named after the passage in the Gospel of Matthew. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have, will be taken from them. It sounds harsh, but it perfectly describes the mechanics of exponential growth. Success breeds exponential success. Capital attracts more capital.
In the realm of business and venture capital, this dynamic is known as the power law. It is essentially Pareto's principle, the famous 80-20 rule, but injected with massive steroids.
To understand the power law, we really must look at the actual mechanics of venture capital. VCs are not just sprinkling money on hundreds of nice ideas hoping a few generate a 10% return.
That's not how the math works for them.
Not at all. The math of their industry requires them to find the rare 0 to 1 companies. Why? Because the vast majority of startups fail completely. A few will break even. Therefore, a venture capitalist must invest in companies that have the potential to return the value of the entire fund on their own.
The statistics bear this out, and they are genuinely staggering. Less than 1% of new businesses started in the U.S. receive venture funding, and total VC investment accounts for less than 0.2% of the U.S. GDP. It is a microscopic sliver of the overall economy.
Yet look at the disproportionate impact. Those venture-backed companies create 11% of all private sector jobs. They generate annual revenues equivalent to an astounding 21% of the U.S. GDP.
But the ultimate proof of the power law, the fact that the biggest successes absolutely dwarfs everything else combined, is looking at the apex predators of the tech world. The dozen largest tech companies are together worth trillions of dollars. Those 12 companies are worth more than all other tech companies on Earth combined.
It's mind-blowing.
The graph isn't a gentle curve, it's a flat line that suddenly spikes into the stratosphere.
The power law dictates that we do not live in a normal distribution. We do not live in a bell curve. The efforts of a tiny fraction of companies, built by a tiny fraction of founders, yield the vast majority of the world's technological progress and financial returns.
You know, it's easy to hear those massive numbers and feel, well, totally insignificant. But for you, the listener, navigating your own career or building your own business, I actually think the power law is incredibly liberating.
Oh, how so?
Because it means you don't need to win 1,000 tiny, exhausting battles. You don't need to grind yourself into dust fighting for a 1% market share in a crowded, competitive, blood-red ocean. You don't have to be slightly better at everything. You just need to align yourself with the few efforts that produce the vast majority of results.
Ah, I see what you mean.
You need to focus your life, your career, your energy on finding that one 0-to-1 opportunity. You just need to be right about one massive contrarian truth and commit to it fully as a definite optimist.
That is a profound application of the concept. However, identifying that contrarian truth and executing that monumental vision is rarely a solitary endeavor. You cannot achieve exponential monopoly-scale growth in a vacuum. The definite optimist needs a highly specialized mechanism to build the future, and that mechanism is a uniquely aligned team.
Which brings us to the ultimate case study in team dynamics, arguably the most famous, most impactful collection of talent in modern business history, the PayPal Mafia.
The term PayPal Mafia is legendary in the Valley. It refers to the core group of founders and early employees who built PayPal alongside Peter Thiel and Max Levchin in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Let's run down the history, because it genuinely reads like a comic book superhero origin story. They built PayPal through extreme adversity, took it public, and eventually sold it to eBay for $1.5 billion in 2002. A massive win.
Massive.
But what happened next is what proves the 0-to-1 philosophy is a replicable framework, not just luck. From that single team, from those specific offices in Palo Alto, came an explosion of creation that reshaped the internet.
It's unparalleled. Elon Musk took his PayPal capital and founded SpaceX and co-founded Tesla Motors. Reid Hoffman co-founded LinkedIn. Steve Chen, Chad Hurley, and Jawed Karim together founded YouTube. Jeremy Stoppelman and Russell Simmons founded Yelp. David Sachs co-founded Yammer. And Peter Thiel himself co-founded Palantir.
Today, every single one of those subsequent companies is worth well over $1 billion. Several are worth hundreds of billions.
When we synthesize this, we have to ask the critical question: how did this happen? This was not a statistical anomaly. It was not a magical coincidence that all these individuals just happened to be sitting next to each other.
Exactly. What was the mechanism? What was the crucible that forged that specific mental model?
It was the culture Thiel and Levchin purposefully cultivated at PayPal. They didn't just hire impressive resumes. They hired people who shared a deeply contrarian mindset. They hired friends and people who could communicate with intense, almost brutal efficiency. And crucially, they operated in an environment of extreme pressure.
Right. They were fighting massive fraud from Russian hackers. They were fighting entrenched banking regulations. They were fighting eBay itself.
They survived the exact dot-com crash that traumatized everyone else. Because they were actually building a 0-to-1 product with a real business model, they were unburdened by the false lessons of 1999. They learned firsthand that a small group of highly aligned, definite optimists could actually engineer the future.
They learned how to build 10x proprietary tech, how to leverage network effects, and how to scale.
Yes. So when they left PayPal, they didn't go start generic coffee shops. They applied that exact same 0-to-1 framework to space travel, to professional networking, to video distribution. They were a network of creators who supported each other's long-term monopoly building plans.
It's the ultimate undeniable proof of concept. They understood the power law, they aimed for 10x improvements, and they entirely ignored the noise of the competitive crowd.
It's an incredible story.
Okay. We have covered massive intellectual ground today, from the dot-com crash to the mechanics of monopolies to the power law and the PayPal Mafia. Let's pull all of this together. Let's distill the core actionable takeaways that you, listening right now, can apply to your own career trajectory, your own startup, or your own strategic thinking tomorrow morning.
First and foremost, think differently. And by differently, we don't just mean being a contrarian for the sake of being annoying or simply doing the exact opposite of what failed in the past.
Right.
It means having the intellectual courage to formulate your own rigorously informed hypothesis about how the world works, even if no one currently agrees with you.
Build unique value. Solve important, unaddressed problems by continuously asking yourself that terrifying question. What valuable company is nobody building? What is the truth about my industry that only I see?
Focus on long-term success. Reject the culture of endless, aimless iteration. Become a definite optimist. Make a bold, definitive plan for the future, even a flawed one, and execute it with conviction. You can adapt the tactics, but never abandon the vision.
And stop competing. Step out of the gladiator arena. Stop obsessively looking at the swimmer in the lane next to you. Create monopolies by focusing on a small, defined micro niche, delivering a 10x improvement over the status quo, establishing network effects, and then scaling from a position of absolute strength.
Ultimately, the philosophy of 0 to 1 challenges us to avoid the comfortable trap of imitation. It asks us to abandon the perceived safety of going from 1 to N. It is an urgent invitation to focus your finite energy on building products, careers, and ideas that genuinely shape the future, rather than just reacting to the present.
Remember the baking analogy from the beginning of the show. You can spend your entire life and exhaust all your resources trying to make a chocolate chip cookie that is 1% chewier than the bakery down the street.
Which is exhausting.
It's exhausting, it's highly competitive, and in the end, you're still just selling a commodity cookie in a crowded market. Or you can step back, look at an empty kitchen, ignore the existing recipes, and invent dessert. The future isn't something we discover, it's something we create. The question is, what will you build from 0 to 1?